Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Full Spectrum. I'm your host, Bill Simonera. This is a weekly broadcast bringing you discussion on current events and political issues. I'm joined tonight by Ramsey Hazbun. Ramsey, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Ramsey Hazbun. I work as an electrical engineer and been pretty politically interested for a very long time. And I thought this was a great opportunity for people with different viewpoints to talk to each other.
He also likes long walks on the beach and candlelit dinners. So,
Always, every night. Just had one tonight.
So, so Ramsey is our very capable representative of the left tonight, and our representative of the right is Frank Campanell. Frank, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Sure, Frank Francesco Campanell. Call me whatever the hell you want. I work in social justice. I work for a prison education program at Temple University called Inside Out. We bring college students, community members into prisons and carceral settings for a semester-long course together as equals. I also work for a juvenile justice company with the purpose of lowering the likelihood that kids go out and recidivate.
So basically the mission of this show is to facilitate a conversation. You know, so many good people are out there with different political views, different ideologies, and we're all united as people and as Americans, and we want to prove that you can actually have calm, intelligent, and respectful discourse with people who don't agree with everything you say. And hopefully you'll take something out of this from all points of view, hence the name, The Full Spectrum. So with that being said, I'd like to dive right in. The first topic I want to talk about is Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. Right now it's kind of prevalent in Congress that they're diving right in and trying to repeal it. Not going swimmingly for the Republican efforts. I'm going to talk more about that. But first I wanted to pose the question, and I'll pose this question to Frank first. Should we repeal Obamacare?
Yeah, and I'll say my caveat is I think that healthcare should be accessible to everyone, especially those who don't have an opportunity to access it as a result of race, socioeconomic, whatever inequality. However, as history, as well, whatever, has it been 30 days of this presidency yet? I don't even know.
It feels like 30 years, but yes, it's been 30 days.
I thought it was supposed to be like 24 hours. It was supposed to get repealed, but I think the Republicans realized pretty quickly that they would ostracize a huge component of their constituency if they just took away the health care of a lot of people that voted them into office. But setting that aside, I don't like calling it Obamacare. I think it's disrespectful. I like calling it the Affordable Care Act. But I think there are fundamental flaws in this legislation. I've gone on a lot of rants about this. I've had a lot of conversations about this. First and foremost, it was run as Obama was running for president against Hillary in the first go-around. He specifically indicated he was not a proponent of the individual mandate, which essentially says you have to buy in. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a doctor here, but the second he shifted his perception on that and discovered that it wasn't financially feasible without an individual mandate, he shifted it. He said that we could keep our health care and we can't keep it anymore. Not to mention, and I can go down this line as the dialogue kind of progresses. I think that it should be adapted and adjusted. I don't think it should be repealed. I think that's ridiculous because these provisions that even Trump says he likes, like the mandate to, the pre-existing healthcare mandate, it's going to fundamentally shift against the patients. I don't think it should be repealed, man. I think that it should be overhauled, and I think we shouldn't incur the burden. It's the people on this in this conversation right now, we're incurring the burden of this legislation. I know that I pay out of pocket for half my goddamn medical care, because I can't afford to pay the deductible on the health insurance that I'm paying. And the thousands and thousands of people in this country that they go onto the exchange and they pick up health care when they're sick and then they drop it when they're not. My back's already breaking. I can only speak for myself. And I'm not going to speak for those that I've talked to, but there is a generation of people out there that cannot afford to foot the bill of an inherently flawed legislation. We're not making enough money to survive. We're already a dead enslaved generation as it is. I don't see anybody helping us. I think components of this thing need to be eradicated completely. But I don't have the expertise to do that. You can't repeal it, and you can't fundamentally adapt it. So I'm kind of at a loss. I mean, I'll throw it out like that. I don't like it.
Well,
I don't
I think your reaction is actually perfectly indicative of what the reaction for Republicans in Congress are right now, because they're very gung ho about jumping in and repealing and replacing, and they even passed the resolution to bring it in reconciliation, and then they were kind of like, "Uh-oh, now what?"
Let's be real here, Bill.
Yeah.
Their plan was to repeal. They did not have any plan for replacing.
Exactly.
And they still don't. And
No.
for exactly the reasons that Francesco pointed out. I mean, it's intractable. I mean, the idea that you're going to suddenly make money appear out of nowhere is pretty unrealistic. So I think I'm a big advocate, and this is where the left side of me comes in, is I think single payer on some kind of limited basis is a good way to replace the individual mandate. I think it would go a long way to driving down the costs of insurance for people who aren't on a single option plan. I think if you deployed properly in the sense of looking at certain markets where there isn't competition for insurance and deploying a single payer system there, as opposed to having a national single payer system, I think there's some ways you could approach the problem. But the general gist of it is having some kind of nonprofit healthcare competition. And how you make it fair to the for-profit insurance companies, I think, is something that's open to discussion. I could see their objections from an anti-competition point of view. But ultimately, the whole point of the individual mandate was to get a good financial basis for insuring people who are really sick. And, I don't think that's really worked out very well. I think, everyone's seen that. It's worked out okay for a good number of people, but it's also worked out pretty terribly for a large number of people. So
it's cheaper to pay the fine and incur that cost of not buying in than it is to buy in and lose a quarter of your paycheck and then have to pay out of pocket because the deductibles are through the ceiling. And then look, I mean, this is driving up the deductible for healthcare for people who really need it, the people that have pre-existing illnesses. So they get on there and they can't even afford it. Yeah, you can have healthcare, but there's no law that says, okay, your deductible needs to be reasonable, so I don't need to mortgage my house and my friend's house and everything I have. And then all of a sudden, I can't meaningfully interact with the economy. That's not a system that's sustainable at any level.
It's worth pointing out that, the individual mandate and, the whole high deductible aspect of the Affordable Care Act were sort of two different components, right? They were both supposed to sort of solve the same problem, which was a lack of funds for funding health insurance for really sick people. One was boost the deductibles, boost the premiums, and, force everyone to sign up for insurance. And the combination of all those things were going to solve the financial equation. They haven't. I think that's pretty obvious. And I think there's probably people who are going to say something like, oh, well, why don't we just boost the penalty for not having insurance so that people are... But, I mean, clearly...
Well, that will do nothing
about
to bring down
six. How old is the Affordable Care Act now? 6 years?
Yes.
7 years? 6 years.
So
6 years ago, a bunch of really smart people who supposedly know how to do math sat down and said, this is what the penalty needs to be. This is how much we need to raise deductibles. And they were wrong.
The problem you run into also is it doesn't seem like they factored in basic supply and demand. So you're mandating everybody get health insurance when you have to realize that once everybody's buying a product and demand goes through the roof, basic economics dictates that prices are going to go along with it. And you would have thought the minds working with the White House and with Congress would have foreseen this. Like, I know there are always unintended consequences, but the basic laws of economics are pretty set in stone. Like, you should pretty much be able to realize that going in, correct?
if people aren't buying in, that's I mean, it's predicated on this idea that people are going to buy in, and we're not going to incentivize you. We're gonna use the stick approach and fine you if you don't buy in. And who's buying in? We're the ones that have to buy in. The ones that aren't making any money, and the ones that, you know, we have all these statistics around employment's on the rise. Part-time employment's not employment. That's not employment you can live off of. You know, people aren't hiring full-time jobs. They're not hiring full-time jobs to the extent that people can live off of those jobs. So you have to have a side hustle and a full-time job, and you're telling me then I have to pay out of pocket for insurance? I mean, it doesn't work. But what rattles me at my core is you're forcing me to buy into this system. To me, on some level, I don't like to equate it, but like I feel like you're taking away freedom. You're taking away the freedom of choice here from me, and I don't like that. There's something in me that intrinsically is violated and wants to lash out as a result of it.
But can you always provide freedom of choice on all matters? I mean, okay, for instance, freedom of choice in car insurance. I think making people buy car insurance is a good idea because we could go into it all day, but that solves a lot of problems as far as deductibles and what happens when somebody's in an accident. But some things, the government's got to step in and, you know, force people's hands sometimes. Is that correct?
Yeah, but driving's not a privilege. Like, driving's not a right; it's a privilege. And to satisfy the criteria to get the privilege of driving, you have to honor, you know, X, Y, and Z, and then it filters down on a state level too. What the Affordable Care Act is saying, which I believe in to an extent, that healthcare, access to healthcare is a right. But going about subsidizing that right or resourcing that right. Just like you said it before, Ramsey, like all these supposedly smart people that were good at math got together and said this was going to work. Why is it fundamentally not working?
Well, I mean, as somebody who's supposedly a really smart person who's good at math, I mean, I recognized back then that it was a really complicated problem. And I think one of the things that kind of hit me at the time was that this isn't going to work very perfectly at all. I mean, very perfectly is the wrong way to say it. This is probably not going to work that well. This might work better than our current system, which actually I do believe the Affordable Care Act is an improvement over where we were before as a country. For certain individuals, I can see there's situations where we've really screwed them. So something needs to be done.
I just asked this, you know, you're bringing up, it made me think of one thing. They introduced this gigantic piece of legislation, fixing everything at once. And yeah, I mean, you pass a law, there are always going to be unintended consequences. There's always going to be things you're like, okay, well, that seemed like a good idea at the time, but it didn't quite work out. Would this have been alleviated a little if maybe they had brought it in piecemeal? Do you think maybe bringing in a few things at a time rather than one gigantic comprehensive piece of legislation might have helped with the rollout, might have helped with it?
No, I think people should have gone into it with the realistic expectation that the first time through wasn't going to be great, just like the last time we've had this healthcare discussion back in the 90s. And I think this next iteration, even if it was even if Hillary Clinton had won and the Democrats controlled Congress and the Senate, you know, even if my guy had won or if Bernie was the president, I think that the next iteration could have been screwed up and we would have had to do this again. And I'm confident that the Republicans are going to give us another iteration that's going to be screwed up somehow and we're going to have to fix it. And I think doing it piecemeal probably won't work because it needs to be somewhat comprehensive. I mean, something that we haven't talked at all about was the rising cost of healthcare, which is, I mean, not independent of insurance, but is another whole problem, some of which has nothing to do with people being insured or not insured.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's an immensely complicated issue with so many stakeholders involved because we're not investing in preventative healthcare, and that's the problem. Because if people aren't getting sick anymore, then there's no people to buy the drugs that we're shoving down people's throats. That's the kind of these are the very immensely complicated and convoluted issues that we have to deal with now. But like what concerns me more than any of this is like, so this whole legislation is predicated on the idea that all these people that are around our age right now in their 20s to like mid 30s are going to be bearing the brunt of this financially. We are a dead enslaved generation that can't engage in the economy in a meaningful way as is if we didn't even have that on our backs. So what's going to happen decades down the road when we can't buy fucking houses? We can't engage in the economy in a meaningful way, or we have to borrow money from our parents. And then all of a sudden, the baby boomer generation, like they need health care. What's going to happen to them? They need to be taken care of.
They'll hop on Medicare and be like, go to hell to the rest of us.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Bill. And Francesca, you said something earlier about the individual mandate. You didn't like being forced to pay for it, and I can get that. And my comment to that was my thought on that was well, at least it's transparent in the sense that you were going to pay for those health costs somehow, some way. Like somehow those costs are going to be passed on to you because we have laws in this country that if you walk into an emergency room, you get treated, and it doesn't matter whether you have insurance or not. And your comment about preventative care is really exactly right on the point because there's so much stuff that could have been, so many costs that could have been limited by preventative care that instead become emergency room visits. And so that's sort of why I think the individual mandate, as painful as it is for people to sort of wrestle with as far as the lack of choice in that situation, and also having to go out and shop for a limited number of insurance policies that all cost a lot of money, is painful. I completely get that. But at the same time, I'm sort of like, well, at least we're being honest about it as far as how this is getting paid for, because all those costs don't go away. People still get sick, whether they have insurance or not, whether we have Affordable Care Act or not, and they all go to the emergency room.
One topic I wanted to also discuss is the interesting correlation between Republican efforts to repeal Obamacare and the Democrats' efforts to pass it in 2009 and 2010. So back in 2009, the Democrats had a proposal that was quite unpopular for the Affordable Care Act. They forced it through reconciliation without any input from the opposition party. This year, the Republicans are trying to force through a repeal of a more popular bill now in the Affordable Care Act through reconciliation without any input from the opposition party. Frank, do you think this could bite them in the ass next November?
This is such an obvious question. First of all, this idea of a repeal is symbolic, okay? There is every single component that's good about the Affordable Care Act is going to stay in whatever the hell they put together, whatever half-ass legislation they put together that they throw out there in the free market that obviously wants to take care of everybody else. So no, yeah, it's going to bite them in the ass. But let's all not forget, the Affordable Care Act, the bones of it, was very much informed by Romney Care. So I don't see this as a partisan issue even. Now, because it's on the main stage, we've turned it into this dichotomous, stupid argument about nothing. Do we want to take care of people or not? Yes or no? If it's yes, then let's all buy in. Let's do it in a way that has as much unanimity as humanly possible in this divided country, and just do it already.
It kind of seems in some ways like it's almost out of spite that the Republicans brought this legislation forward. Hear me out here. I mean, in the end, the American people didn't elect Trump because they were as concerned about the Affordable Care Act as they were about jobs. But what's the first issue they tried to tackle is repealing the Affordable Care Act. It almost seems, maybe spite's not the best word, but a stubbornness involved here. Is there still some bitterness about the fact that it got passed in the first place?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's that whole shadow meeting that was said to have happened with all the key Republicans the second Obama got elected. We're going to put up a firewall and not support or agree or work with Obama at any capacity.
They were going to do everything they could to make sure Obama was a one-term president. I think it was one of the quotes, something like that.
That's not governing. It's not governing. That's the problem.
Obviously, those kinds of conversations happen all the time, and I mean, we all know that, right? I mean, you don't delude yourself when you hear one political party plotting against another. It's not too shocking. I think, I don't know if I'd call it stubbornness, more or spite. I think it was more like they had a message that worked really well for them for a really long time as far as getting elected, which was repeal Obamacare. Like, screw Obama, he made us pay all this money for an individual mandate, now we're going to repeal it. And they ran with that message for 6 years. And it served them really, really well. And I think now they thought, going into after this election, that no, that was really what people wanted them to do, and they should keep trying to stick with that message because it's worked so well for them. But I think now that they're actually in a situation where they can actually do the thing they said they're going to do for the last 6 years, they've realized, oh, wait.
This is a lot harder than we thought. Yeah.
Maybe we should have all worked together on this 6 years ago.
Or maybe,
maybe that would have been productive.
Maybe we should have come up with a plan before we even got into this situation, because that was the big criticism with the Republicans for all those years was, okay, well, if you've got such a better idea, what is it? And you never got an answer out of them. And now people are like, okay, well, you're not going to just repeal it, or that crap where they were going to repeal it and then say, okay, we need to punt it down the road for 2 years till we come up with something better. They're like, you need to have a concrete plan, and now it looks like they're scrambling to slap something together.
Well, there is no concrete plan, but I do like, so I remember when Obama was going in to present the Affordable Care Act, the first iteration of Republicans, and the Republicans were ripping it apart. I think it was an incredibly divisive kind of experience. That's what I took away from it anyway. But I mean, if this would have had some of that feedback from the Republicans in the first place, I don't think we'd be seeing a lot of these issues.
But with the Republicans, were the Republicans willing to give feedback in the first place?
No.
That's the thing. Like, I mean, we mentioned Republican feedback, but I mean, Obama, to his credit, reached out his hand to congressional Republicans over and over again, much to the chagrin of Democrats, whose attitude was basically, screw them, they don't want to work with you. So I don't know if that would really have been a valid argument, in that I don't think there would have been any input even. I mean, how nicely would Obama have had to ask in order to get it?
So I think it could have happened if it was in the public eye. It could have happened. You know, you have all these. What was it? Paul Ryan had the entire legislation from him, and Obama laughed. He's like, "Wow, you have the whole damn thing in front of you." He was like, yeah, and he started going through line item by line item. I think like if you could have popularized that moment and like it seeped into our collective unconscious, that's in and of itself an accountability mechanism on both Obama and the Republicans at the time to start like incorporate pieces of this. I mean, something should have happened, and I can't throw the onus on anyone. I'll throw this on Republicans for not wanting to work with Obama, because part of the problem with Obamacare, and again, I hate Obamacare, is that what I said right there. We conflate the Affordable Care Act with Obamacare. It's messaging and language, and that shit is fucking powerful. So people conflate so tightly this idea of access to health care with Obama, and Republicans hate Obama, and that's what every Republican ran on. So now
you raised an interesting point there, though, too, is that when you ask people about the Affordable Care Act and tenants in it, it's very popular. As soon as you start using the term Obamacare, that's when people suddenly turn against it. It's an interesting thing to see.
But you mentioned healthcare, and people it harkens the idea of the Obama administration. And that's problematic if you have a country that's as divided as we are right now. Because I think if this work to me is relational, if we can all get on the ground and have these conversations, I think these problems and these obstacles would have been tackled already. But because we're so dug in as a country, like, I don't understand why we can't just get together and just be like, this is not about Obama. This is not a partisan issue. This is a human issue, and we've decided as a country, it got voted in, regardless if you supported it or not. It is now on the books. It's essentially a human right. So we're raising our evolving standard of decency in this country to having access to health care is a basic human right. That's essentially what we said. So we can get on board and fix the problem or not. But if the Republicans immediately said, we're going to repeal it, and I'm gonna repeal it, but then they said we're gonna delay as well. The fact that they said delay, I would have had every single one of them fired if I was their constituent. I would delay what? You said you were gonna have this thing out. What? So it was so obvious and overtly an empty promise and rhetoric that everybody was running on the entire campaign. If they couldn't have got something through, what is it's. Republicans control everything, and soon to be the Supreme Court. They've never had this level of control over the government since what, like what was the stat that I heard, like the 20s or something like that? I mean,
as far as their position nationally as well as in the federal government, yeah, it's been since the 20s since they've been this powerful.
I think the Republicans used their lack of control as an excuse not to govern. Back when Obama was elected, and they spent the last 8 years not governing, and the end result is what we're watching right now, which is they don't actually really know how to govern anymore. It seems like they've kind of forgotten, and they're going to have a really hard time learning how to do it again. And the idea that you can govern without working with the other side is kind of absurd. And I actually do believe in that, kind of changing the topic, is I think a lot of this is correlated to when we started allowing a lot of money into elections, because it went from being held responsible by your constituents to you being held responsible by your donors, and I think that forced a lot of this non-government kind of situation. And I think if I was a libertarian, and I believed in lesser limited government, I would look at the current situation and actually consider it more offensive than a fully functioning government. Because this is like government waste at its worst. These guys are getting elected, and they're not even discussing laws with each other. I mean, that's what happened with Obamacare. The Republicans were basically, we're not even going to entertain a compromise. I mean, that was how it went down. So, that's worse than a big government. Is a huge government that doesn't even govern. That's terrible.
I mean, and I would offer specificity. Like, I don't know where I am on the spectrum, politically this moment, but I'd say like conservative, contrarian, libertarian. I don't know what the hell. I know that lesser government, I think, is a good thing, but with lesser government, the corollary is you heavily resource the things that you start to break down. And that's something that I don't see as a value set in libertarians or conservatives. I think, like, if you're going to start disaggregating this monstrous, like, labyrinthian nightmare that the government is right now, you have to heavily resource these entities that are providing, like, life or death services or crucial services to our population. Like, so, no, I don't see. So I feel really disenchanted and disconnected politically because like you said before, I have no efficacy. I can't have this kind of conversation with 350 million people in this country. So what efficacy do I really have to make a difference politically? That's where I'm saying.
I hear you. Okay, well, you know what, guys? I want to move on to the next topic. Now, this is one that's very important. It may become even more important if the Democrats win back the Congress next year. Let's talk about Mike Flynn. So I got a timeline of events here of what this putz did. I just love looking back at the video of him chanting "Lock her up," or leading that chant at the Republican convention. It's just, the irony is just too delicious. I'll put it that way. So, as we know, we found out Russia was meddling in the election. Obama announced sanctions. Flynn had conversations with Russian ambassador to the United States, urging Russia not to retaliate. It wound up getting wiretapped. The question I have to ask here is, first off, did Flynn break the law? Ramsey, what do you think?
Probably. I mean, I think the law is kind of cut and dry about it. That being said, do I think it's worth chasing Flynn 2 years from now if Congress wins, or if the Democrats win over Congress? Absolutely not. I think it's
no. I think Flynn's in the clear at this point. I don't think he's going to be.
Honestly, I think most of Trump's sort of appointees right now are not necessarily secretaries of different cabinet positions, but the people in his administration. I think a lot of them are going to be gone in a year. If he's not, I think the first 30 days were kind of an example. Mike Flynn is probably the most shining example of he just has really bad people around him right now.
Exactly. But also, you know what? Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, she informed White House counsel that Flynn had lied about the nature of the calls. And also said he was vulnerable to blackmail. The White House ignored it. And that information made its way to Trump. Could this issue be used by the Democrats to ultimately impeach Donald Trump? Frank, what do you think?
Since when do we live in a country where common sense and critical thought matters anymore, dude? He'll just say, I didn't do it. Well, I didn't know I couldn't do that. Like, it feels like a Chappelle bit to me. He would need to do something so overtly. Actually, I am almost 100% confident that if he did shoot somebody in cold blood in the middle of New York City, he would get away with it and not get impeached. Dude, I don't know what it would take.
That being said, remember what Bill Clinton got impeached for.
Yeah, exactly.
The bar isn't that high.
No.
Anything's possible. I don't know. I think you should fully expect Democrats to continue to make lots of noise about the Trump administration and any connections it might have to Russia. And part of that's going to be Flynn. Part of that's going to be Manafort. I think there's a lot of questions that could be asked there. One thing I'd be curious about is if you ask those same kinds of questions about previous administrations, what you might find out.
I'm sure every single president's done something impeachable, and I'm sure Trump will do that at an exponential rate today. But throughout the entire term of other presidents. But I don't know. I don't know, man. He's brilliant at separating himself and creating a space of plausible deniability, not only because you can't understand what he's saying, but strategically, if you watched the news conference a couple days ago, he's like, I didn't instruct him, but I would have. Manafort's a great guy, but I wasn't aware of anybody saying that or doing anything or connected to Russia. He's very smart at positioning himself. And as dumb as we all think he is sometimes, I still believe he has to have some shred of common sense somewhere. I have to believe that at some capacity, despite all the evidence to the contrary. But no, he's going to have to do something that's absolutely ridiculous. I think I'm more concerned with the attack on the judiciary. That's more of an area where I think you could have legitimate impeachment processes enacted if indeed the Democrats do win the Senate and the House. But then again, you have a Senate and the House for the last, as long as I've been alive, that's had an approval rating of lower than 20%. So I don't.
Yeah, it stood in the teens recent years. Yeah.
I think the Democrats, I think what you're going to see is the Democrats are going to probably pursue the story with Mike Flynn as much as they can, considering they're a minority party right now. I think they have a good cause, and I think a lot of Republicans would agree to investigate ties to Russia, mainly what Russia was trying to do to influence our election and things like that. I think those are good questions. I think everyone should know that we do that kind of stuff in Russia all the time.
Of course.
We absolutely try to influence Russian and many other countries' elections, doing the same kinds of things that Russia just did to us. So, if anybody doesn't know that, they should. That is something that's happening all the time.
It almost seems karmatic,
it's a little bit.
All the meddling we've done in other nations' elections, all of a sudden the tables got turned on us. Yes, there is a little bit of karma involved in this situation, I would say.
But I think what you'll see is the Democrats are going to try to make a mountain out of a molehill with the Flynn situation, which I think asking questions about Russia and Trump's ties internationally is really important. I think from a financial point of view, he hasn't divested himself. He's highly invested in a lot of other countries, and he stands to gain or lose a lot of money, and he's keenly aware of that. There's going to be other opportunities for the Democrats to nail Trump on other things. And I think the Flynn situation isn't necessarily the best one.
The Russian issue, look, this to me isn't a partisan issue yet again. You have a foreign agent playing around with key processes that inform, your democracy, the underpinning of our country. When did all of a sudden, like, we as a country start, like, not caring about other countries fundamentally messing with us?
Well,
like,
part of the country does. The other part voted for Trump, so they're not particularly concerned about it. Their horse won. So I think that's I think that's a big part of the problem we're seeing. I think it should worry Americans in that I don't know if we fully have our sovereignty anymore. We have a president who is aided by a foreign government. What does that say about the sovereignty of the United States of America?
Dude, like, I don't know. So, like, I'm not educated enough specifically on that. Like, I wouldn't make that general assumption myself, like, that he was absolutely aided in winning this election.
No,
but
I'm not saying that Russia is the reason it happened. We could go into that all night, right? Why he got elected. But I'm just saying this element of it, does it raise a concern that maybe our sovereignty is at stake?
Well, you know what Trump said? Trump said something really smart the other day when he was on O'Reilly. There was two smart people in a room together, like we were. But what did he say? O'Reilly said, Putin's a killer, and he's like, oh, you think we're all so innocent? I'm like, that should bite him in the ass, because that's the truth, dude. And he is the main culprit here. Like, we are not innocent, dude. And I don't think we live in a sovereign country anymore. I don't think we lived in a sovereign country since 9/11, man. Since the Patriot Act, and since Obama, he had an opportunity to repeal the Patriot Act. Yeah? He did not do that, dude. What he did was like, give me that again. But let me inject anabolic steroids from Rocky IV into your shoulder and then give it to me.
Yeah, not one of the things I was very pleased with Obama about. Not at all.
Well, the thing with Obama, and you know what, I wanted to touch on the Democrats in a minute, but one thing with Obama that he was so clever with was he let people project onto him what they wanted to see. Obama is still very, very popular. Well, maybe not as much as he was in the beginning, but he's still popular with the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. Obama isn't liberal. And
no.
That's something at all. Like, he's very much a moderate. And yet he became this champion for the left. And I just find it amusing just how clever he was at letting people project that onto him.
Well, because he's a smart dude. You're talking about a constitutional lawyer that existed in the Ivy League and excelled. I think, on whether or not I agreed with him or not, I think he was a really smart man that knew how to move his interests forward. He is a smart man that knows how to move his interests forward, because he knew it wasn't about him. It was about something bigger than him, the country. So if he had an interest that he thought was going to serve his agenda and his country, he was going to. It wasn't about him. He let people project on him the whole time. I think it was so immensely, and I know we're not going the social justice route, but the ways in which we projected his culpability in not addressing race as the first black president within the first month of his presidency, that's some of the most racist shit. And people say we're not racist anymore. Racism's dead.
The post-racial world is what they used to call it in 2009, yeah.
Well, this last election was a pretty rude awakening, I think.
I think so. I think people were kind of like, okay, we can take the mask off now. Let's show what it's really like. And unfortunately, a lot of instances, and I've heard about it in schools. There's one school around here where I heard about a kid. There were a lot of Muslim girls wearing hijabs, and this one kid was going around pulling them off and going, well, Trump's president now. Like, it was there. It was just kind of in the shadows a little bit.
Well, we should have the same panel on and talk about intersecting issues and the implications the Trump election and presidency is having on these issues, because I would love to speak to that directly. But I think that as a result of him being in office, we are now surfacing our baser nature. And I think a lot of people that are predisposed to engage in racism and discriminatory practices and behaviors and kind of sexual assaults, shit like that, I think it will surface quicker and get addressed quicker But we are all complicit in at some capacity in this man being in office right now, and there is a lot of work to be done as a result, man.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, the one question I wanted to pose is, so we've talked about Trump, we've talked about the Democrats in some ways. Where do the Democrats go from here? Ramsey, what do you think on this? I'll give
Oh.
you first crack on that.
I think they spend the next year watching the Republicans screw things up. And if they're smart, they spend a lot more time and effort on their ground game. I think the place, I mean, you know this, and this is something that, like, you know, my mother talks about all the time because of the local elections around where we grew up. I mean, it's amazing how uninvolved Democrats are in the local elections relative to Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in an area where, you know, the demographics aren't that unfavorable to Democrats. I mean, it's it's kind of surprising. They sort of dropped the ball, and I think if they were smart, that's what they'd start building on. I think that's likely to pay dividends over the long term. Now, as far as the next election goes, I honestly think there's not a whole lot the Democrats can do except basically say, we don't agree with what the Republicans are doing. We've told them we don't agree with it, but they're going to do it anyway, and then let the Republicans do it. I don't think they're going to get any more than that. I mean, they're not going to stop them. So they just have to let the Republicans hang themselves.
Interesting take. Frank, what do you think? The reason I want to hear your perspective is in 2009, beginning of 2009, everybody thought the Republican Party was dead in the water. Democrats would control Congress for 40 years. Republicans would never recover from this. And yet they did in 8 years. And now they're in control of both houses of Congress and the presidency.
Supermajority.
What's that?
With an unprecedented supermajority.
Yeah, that's what the situation was in 09 for the Democrats coming in, was with the supermajority. Yeah, absolutely. And they did. Frank, how did the Republicans do it? How did your side do this?
My side didn't do this. I think there are some core issues that galvanized an already divided country, and I think a lot of circumstances coalesced at one time that Democrats could never represent at an effective level. And you know, I will say the Democratic Party needs a movement like tantamount to the Tea Party to happen within its own ranks, because it's a group of ineffective people that like to whine and moan and not get anything done. I gotta say, there are some really good people that are Democrats in Congress. I'm a huge fan of Cory Booker, and I always have been, and I think he's doing some courageous things right now. But what the hell are they doing, man? How can Debbie Wasserman Schultz literally rig an election for a primary candidate and then get hired by the candidate's election committee right after the fact? This is indicative. Somebody that runs the DNC, she should have been arrested for that, man. I think she should have been arrested for that. That, to me, that was the end. That single-handedly won the election for Trump right there. And if Democrats want to do something about this, they need to fundamentally clean house. This whole all of a sudden Chuck Schumer's on the street with protesters, and now everybody's politically engaged. I want to do grassroots movement. Get the fuck out. Where were you doing that like 8 years ago?
Well, I think one thing we misjudged was, and I was guilty of this before the election, you saw the movement of working class whites over to the Republican Party. And after 2008, and especially after 2012, an attitude was pervasive of, oh well, who needs them? And when you took a look at the demographics, you took a look at what Obama did, especially in 2012, he lost 60% of the white vote and still won 332 electoral votes. That was unheard of in electoral history. So it kind of seemed like the demographic changes had made it to a point where we didn't really need to worry about the working class whites anymore. But it looks like we might have gone wrong in our economic message. Because as much as, I did
What
applaud Hillary's message. As much as I applauded Hillary's efforts of stronger together and stuff like that, yes, we kind of neglected the fact that in the Rust Belt, they weren't concerned about these issues such as an immigration ban or the Muslim ban and stuff like that. Their bigger concern was manufacturing jobs. And that's what they voted for Trump on. And at what point did we lose that message among white working class voters? When did we start going wrong?
It's not just the jobs. So you want to ask how Republicans did this. There are 2 points here. I'll steal the Louis C.K. bit, like where he says like a technical high school is where kids go to have their dreams narrowed down. Just like that, the American dream has now been narrowed down. People don't want to go rag to riches anymore. They want to just live a life where they don't have to worry and live paycheck to paycheck. They want to have the savings. They want to be able to buy a house and send a kid to college, even assuming or incurring debt along the way. But that's where we're at now. I think, not taking into account every other issue we talk about is because of a simple value disconnect. The values that they're projecting did not sync up with the values of those that voted against them. And we're talking about core level values here. We're talking about I can't assimilate to your value set if you're going to talk down to me and you're going to ostracize me and demonize me because I have a value set that's rooted in my experience and my education. So dude, of course people that live in the middle of nowhere that work manufacturing jobs don't have a value around higher education to the extent that maybe somebody in a city does, or the value around race equality or diversity, nor do they see its value add to our economy or this country. The ways in which liberals have talked to people that have any conservative values has been so condescending and destructive and inflammatory and incendiary. I'll stop there. It's traumatic.
It was arrogant. I mean, I'm not a very conservative person. I have pretty liberal views. This is true. But I even saw that the way that rational, reasonable Republicans were being, name called was just sort of non-productive and arrogant, really, because they thought they were in power and they were morally right and politically right, and that gave them grounds to be arrogant. And I think Debbie Wasserman Schultz is sort of the personification of that in recent memory, in the sense that there were some within the Republicans or some within the Democratic Party who controlled the party who felt that they were right in every way. And it didn't really matter whether there was other people within their own party, let alone outside of the party, who didn't agree with them. I think that said a lot in the primary. I mean, how could you, if the Democratic Party couldn't seriously consider having a second primary candidate and actually entertain that as a possibility, honestly, for the first half of the primary? I mean, the first half of the primary, they're just he's just a fly, swat him, no big deal. And I think that was really arrogant on their part. And it's clear that if you saw that happening even remotely in the Democratic Party, what were they doing to Republicans? What were they doing to moderate Republicans? How were they responding to them? Well, clearly they weren't responding to them well. And I think that's sort of what got them into trouble this last election. And in fact, it's what's been getting them in trouble since the Tea Party started. I mean, it's that kind of attitude that's slowly but surely alienated a lot of moderate people.
What we heard was the death rattle, the silent majority, which is now objectively the silent minority. They just had enough influence at this moment in this time to influence the Electoral College voters to fulfill their obligation. But I mean, dude, you're right. At the end of the day, man, just because somebody doesn't see the value in what you see value in doesn't make them a fundamentally bad person.
No, and I think it was also an issue of listening, in that the Democratic Party and a lot of people demonized Trump supporters as, to use the term, the basket of deplorables. They just deemed everybody who supported Trump was a misogynistic racist. And you saw that out of a lot of people, how they stereotype Trump supporters.
Well,
And when you
ask
actually
us now.
listened to Trump supporters,
Ask ourselves right now. Just go around. Like, just you two, on some level, do you think anybody that voted for Trump is racist? Like, is that floating around in your consciousness somewhere, or has like some set of like ignorance in that?
I think there's
anyone or everyone.
Everyone or any? Let's say everyone.
No, I don't think everyone. Obviously not. And honestly, I think that if you voted for Trump because of his economic policies, you're incredibly gullible because he didn't really have any. And it doesn't even matter whether you agree with his economic policies or not is irrelevant because he didn't really have any defined ones, as is the case with a lot of his policies during the election. And I think the same thing goes with, you asked about racism. I don't think most Trump supporters are racist or bigoted or prejudiced or whatever, and no more than any Democratic voter might be, as far as prejudices and things like that are concerned. But I think there are Trump supporters who are clearly racist. I don't think
exactly.
but there was clearly Barack Obama supporters who hate white people. I mean, there's a small minority in every set, right, that ruins it for everyone. And I don't think it wouldn't be a fair statement to say that about a lot of Trump supporters. And actually, what I was wondering about was, I remember during the election, I know I personally said something about it on Facebook where I was like, look, please look at Trump. Look at his policies. They're terrible. Vote for anybody else. I don't care who. You can vote for my guy. You can vote for Mickey Mouse. But his policies are really, really bad, and you shouldn't support them. And if you think they're a good idea, you should really think twice.
I think he tapped into an anger from the Rust Belt and from the white working class of being left behind, and these blue-collar jobs that have been disappearing in the Midwest have really, really hurt people. And we had the stereotype. Well, we had the stereotype of what the point I was trying to make before was we had the stereotype of these Trump supporters are just a bunch of racists and et cetera, without actually listening to their concerns and why they were leaning towards Trump, why they were moving towards Trump. It was because of an economic message that promised to bring them back after having been left behind. And that was something we neglected in the Democratic Party to address, would have just been as easy as listening to people in that region of the country, listening to their concerns and addressing them rather than just lumping them all together with the white nationalists who supported Trump from the beginning.
It's not just listening and addressing them. It's crafting your message in a way that's digestible.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean by addressing and crafting a message around it, crafting a clear economic message, and crafting a plan to do exactly what the Rust Belt working class is hoping that Trump will do.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that I think Democrats are doing a lot of hand-wringing about this whole, how did they treat Trump supporters question, right? We didn't listen to them. We didn't treat them with respect. And I think, okay, that's somewhat true. I will point out, though, that historically, when you look at elections, that's pretty much what always happens. I remember in Obama, both of Obama's elections. I remember back when it was Al Gore versus George W. Bush or John Kerry. I remember all the time. You'd hear people say those kinds of things, like those ignorant people on this side, or those some kind of just completely ad hominem, like prejudiced attack on the other side. And it was really common, and it happened all the time. I think the reason why the Democrats are doing hand-wringing about it now is A, they lost, but B, Trump did a really, really good job of turning that around on them. And I don't think the phenomenon was new, and I don't necessarily think the Democrats are any more guilty of it in this election than they have been in previous elections, or the Republicans for that matter. But I do think Trump did an excellent job.
He highlighted the extent to which that self-aggrandizing, self-righteous kind of, kind of experience that's so pervasive amongst Democrats. It was literally directed at them, I think, and that's not necessarily what was happening. But dude, the Rust Belt. Dude, Rust Belt always votes Republican. It wasn't the Rust Belt that.
Well, it's also Michigan and Wisconsin, which are supposed to be the blue wall. You know, and that's what's as perplexing about this. And what really is so jarring for the Democratic Party is these were supposed to be the most reliable Democratic states. And Trump flipped them. And now it's like, where do we go from here? Like, we have no path without those two states, really. Without those two states and Pennsylvania.
They could easily flip back.
I think so too. And what I honestly think is going to happen is, you remember Obama won Indiana and North Carolina in 2008. And in 2012, the Republicans were basically like, okay, you gave this guy a chance, now come home. And I think you're going to see that in 2020. But it is still kind of, in regard to Michigan and Wisconsin, but it is still kind of a jarring thing. Like, in 2004, it was all going to come down to Ohio. Ohio is a right-leaning state. It's not shocking if it goes over to the Republican side. The fact that Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, which has been reliably blue for past 24 years, the fact that those ones were the ones that tipped against the Democratic Party and put Trump in power, that was something that was particularly jarring.
It's all unprecedented. But look at the othering that's happening. It's like what you were saying. Like, we're othering each other. And if it's this divided, now we live in a world where the old Kipling quote, if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. We live in a world where if you don't stand for this something, then you stand on the other side of my something. And that is dangerous. That's the
well, you know what, buddy? That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That's why I'm doing this show, is so that we can maybe get away from that mindset. Like, here we had Ramsey, more of a liberal person, and Frank, more of a conservative, had an intelligent conversation, didn't resort to name calling, aren't chasing each other down right now. See, it can happen. We can have discourse.
I'd be happy to do it again.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be happy to have you guys on, but that is the whole point of this show. And if you watch this show tonight, I really hope that you got something out of it, way beyond just, hearing your side or enjoying the debate, but maybe think of something in a different way. Maybe hear some information from the other side that, makes you rethink your values, or just, be able to say, you know what, I can go have a conversation with somebody of the opposite political ideology, and it won't be the end of the world. So that's my hope. That's all the time we've got for tonight. I'd like to thank Ramsey and Frank for the great conversation, and hopefully you'll join us next week for another great discussion as well. Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.